Yesterday I was preaching from Leviticus, and the passage was "Be holy, as I am holy." And further down in the text, it reads, "You shall not be partial to the poor, or defer to the great, but with justice you should judge your neighbor." Now, I found that to be a little bit tough to figure out. I spent some time wrestling with that last week. We all know that we shouldn't be deferential to the great, right? We shouldn't suck up to the rich and the powerful people. I think we kind of still do that anyway. Anybody in authority or with influence, we tend to give them a lighter go of it. But even as we do it, we do know that it's not right. But the being partial to the poor was that was a harder one for me to figure out. Um, as I put some thought into it, I recognized that just as always agreeing with and turning a blind eye to the actions of those who have power and influence, it enables their bad behavior, right? It shields them from the consequences of their actions. But the same is actually true for those of us who are lower than us on the social scale as well. When we're overly partial towards them, we enable their bad behavior and we shield them from the consequences of their actions. So a more loving response, according to Leviticus, is to seek justice, true justice, keeping in mind, of course, that God's justice is very well seated with grace, very generously seated. But little did I think that as I was thinking and praying and writing, how quickly this all would be put to the test. Because no sooner had I finished delivering the message, I came downstairs and there was somebody waiting for me. I was faced with my sermon. So my sermon manifested itself to me in the form of a young man. Maybe not so young anymore. He was certainly younger when I first came to town. He's now in his 30s. So he came in. He was cold and distraught. He'd spent the night on the streets. He had nowhere to go. Now he'd always been living precariously. He would get an apartment and then he would lose it, and then he'd spend some time couch surfing, and then he'd get connected up with social assistance again and get set up and start the process all over again, and then lose it, and then staying with friends. But over the years, though, he's used up all of his resources. So his family won't take him in any longer, nor will his friends. He's burned his bridges with social services and with emergency housing several times over. So at this point, he's just homeless. He's got nowhere to go. So suddenly I had to figure out what exactly that means to not show partiality to the poor. I had to take my words from just a few minutes earlier and learn how to put them into practice. So I started off by calling around and seeing if I could find some kind of emergency housing for him. But that's something that we have very little of in Simcoe. And there's certainly nothing available on a Sunday morning. You can't get a hold of anybody who can do anything to help. So I ended up sending him over to the Best Western, and I called over with my credit card number. I figured at least this way he could have a shower and a good night's sleep, and maybe he could figure things out in the morning. But I can't figure out whether I've done the right thing or not. I mean, certainly when we're faced with a human being who is suffering, compassion is in order, right? Like there's no point in lecturing him about his poor choices when he's cold and hungry and upset. When we read through the Bible, we see that Jesus always helped first, and then afterwards he would speak about faith. But then I think about Leviticus and that idea of showing partiality. And over the years, when I look at my relationship with this kid, my compassion has certainly enabled him. I bought him work boots for when he was going to start a new job. Kyung-Soo paid a couple of months of back hydro so it wouldn't get shut off. Lots of lunches, $20 here, $40 there, the hotel, like easily more than $500 poured into this kid alone. And he's certainly not the only one that comes around. I mean, he's not unique. So add to this, of course, the numerous food basics cards that come from the church, as well as the grocery bags. Nancy bought him a bus ticket to Brantford last week. And then just the hours and hours and hours that I've spent listening to him when he just comes in unannounced, and I stop what I'm doing, talk with him, try and support him, help him reason through things. And yet here we are. It doesn't end. So is he unfixable? Is he unhelpable? I don't know. Certainly, God doesn't give up on anybody. He doesn't consider anybody to be irredeemable. But this kid also isn't looking for God's help. So the question is, how do we draw that line between compassion and then just simply enabling a self-absorbed, indulgent lifestyle? How do we allow people to experience and learn from the consequences of their actions while not at the same time just standing by and heartlessly watching somebody else suffer? These are really big questions, and I don't really have the answers. I don't really know what to do. But I do know that I better figure it out soon, though, because after his stay at the hotel is done at lunchtime or whenever, I'm quite sure that I'm going to be seeing him again, and very soon. But the point is that putting our faith into practice, it's not an easy task. But I think it's actually in wrestling with these very real issues and very real people, that it's in this process that we find Jesus, and in finding Jesus that we are transformed. And I think that this kind of wrestling, this is our very walk of faith. This is what we are called to do. So I do hope that you have a difficult decision to make today. I do hope that you have to wrestle with what your faith means and learn how to put it into action, because that is what we are all called to do.